Tragedy approaches swiftly now. In that gale of multitude lurks a man with a pistol, bound by a blood oath to kill the king. He was a Croatian terrorist.
A continent of immense historical grandeur and deep-seated rivalries has witnessed some of the most grisly and chilling assassinations of its royalty. From brutal betrayals to blood-soaked coups, these rulers met their ends in horrifying ways. Join us as we uncover the top 15 most savage and haunting assassinations of European monarchs, where betrayal and bloodshed sealed their fates. King Alexander I of Yugoslavia. While visiting Marseille, France, King Alexander I of Yugoslavia died in a horrific accident in 1934. He was assassinated during a state visit to France and Yugoslavia to enhance relations. Alexander and French Foreign Minister Louis Barthot were in a car when Vlado Chernozemski shot. Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization activist Chernozemski. It promoted Macedonia's independence. After throwing the bomb at the car, it exploded and killed everyone. Chernozemski shot King Alexander twice with a Mauser handgun, thus killing him swiftly. In the pandemonium, a French police bullet accidentally killed Barthot. Politicians pursued King Alexander for years. Following the November 1932 Croatian Ustaše rebellion, he believed his death was necessary to transform Yugoslavia. Under Benito Mussolini, the Italian government aided the Ustaše. This worsened relations with Yugoslavia. Mussolini believed that overthrowing Alexander would destabilize Yugoslavia. It would allow Italy to flourish without France. Newsreel footage showed the injured automobile driver. He was slouching against the brakes after the murder. The commotion was filmed, but not the gunfire. The crowd quickly restrained and battered Chernozemski before a French policeman killed him with his sword. The murder caused many political issues. Italian office buildings were protested because many Yugoslavs believed Italy was involved. In Hungary, the killers were trained and armed. French police found they traveled using phony Czechoslovak IDs. France allied with Britain. Therefore, the French government was afraid to officially criticize Mussolini. The murder strained France-Yugoslavia relations. King Richard III of England. Things were awful in 1485 when King Richard III was brutally killed. The 22nd August Battle of Bosworth Field saw Richard lead a mad horse charge against Henry Tudor, but his troops lost. Tudor supporters attacked Richard. According to old stories, Welsh foot troops with halberds beat him in the head multiple times. Many sides fought Richard III, and his bones exhibited many head injuries. The damage suggests he lost or had his helmet removed during the encounter. He was hit numerous times in the head, including a heavy blow to the base of his brain. So he was hit with heavy weaponry. The lack of defensive wounds on his hands and wrists suggests he was wearing armor. There are no defensive cuts. Therefore, these were presumably done after he died or lost his weapon. Cuts like the buttocks, one may have been body shaming. Richard's armor and garments were removed after the combat. Poet Polydore Virgil describes the naked person on a horse with drooping limbs. The Plantagenet reign ended when Richard III died walking through the streets. Emperor Nero of Rome. Death for Nero in 68. AD was spectacular and horrific. Nero secretly fled Rome in June 9, 68 AD, after the Senate declared him a public enemy. He fled to Phaon's residence outside the city, where he was secure. Due to his cruelty and excess, Nero died horribly as his authority diminished. Nero was terrified and frantic when the guards approached. He struggled to end his life at first. Nero even ordered a slave to demonstrate by doing it first. He hoped that would inspire him to do it. The assistants declined, so Nero had to cope with the outcome. Nero ultimately did take his own life. He pulled 2 knives from his pocket but didn't use them. Epaphroditus, his servant, helped him perform the act in his final moments. Legend has it that Nero's dying words were remorse and pessimism about his life and situation. Despite losing power, Nero's journey continued. People soon speculated that he might be alive and reclaim his reign. Over the next 20 years, countless Nero impersonators appeared. Parthians and other outsiders supported these phony Neros to foment problems in Rome. Even though his last days were tumultuous and chaotic, some believed he would return. This reveals his complex and long-lasting rule. King Charles I of England. The death of King Charles I on January 30, 1649, was sad and significant in English history. Parliament was a major issue for Charles, king since 1625. His Catholic marriage to Henrietta Maria angered many English Protestants. Charles's conviction in king's divine authority made him a dictator. This doctrine held that God chose monarchs above the law. When war money was needed, he repeatedly dissolved Parliament and administered the country alone. The English Civil War, which Charles lost, was caused by the Parliament-Charles conflict. The High Court of Justice tried King Charles after his loss. The trial was controversial because many didn't think a king should be tried. Charles was found guilty fast, since he didn't plead or acknowledge the court's authority. The people dubbed him a despot, traitor, and enemy. Charles was executed after house arrest at St. James's Palace. His death was ordered by 59 commissioners. People gathered at Whitehall to observe his execution. Charles wore 2 shirts to appear calm because he feared his shaking would be viewed as panic. He was transported to the Banqueting House Truss at 2 in the afternoon. He instantly informed the gathering that he was changing his crown from corruptible to incorruptible. Putting his head on the block prepared him for the hit. One strike from the executioner's axe killed him instantly. People's reactions to his head held up to the audience were divided. His bleeding clothing was gifted by onlookers. His death ended the monarchy and established republican rule in England. Louis XVI of France. King Louis XVI died cruelly on January 21, 1793, during the French Revolution. The National Convention convicted him of high treason, and his death changed French and European history. The revolution overthrew Louis XVI, monarch of France from 1774. After the monarchy ended on September 21, 1792, Charles and his family were imprisoned in Paris Temple Prison. After declaring the French Republic, the convention discussed his fate. Everyone agreed that Louis plotted against the nation on January 15, 1793. They denied his request for more sleep time. However, he saw his family one last time. Jean-Baptiste Cléry, Louis's servant, awakened him up at 5 in the morning on January 21. He dressed, attended his last mass with his confessor, and wrote his will. He rode a green vehicle around Paris with troops at 9 a.m. The police were out in force, and many others gathered to watch. Louis arrived at the Place de la Révolution at 10 in the morning and was shown a gallows. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, and his companions met him. He stripped and spoke to the crowd before being guillotined. The sword sliced off his head. Some in the crowd shouted, "Liberty" and "Republic" during the execution. Louis was buried swiftly in the old church of the Madeleine. In 1815, the Bourbon Restoration reburied him and Marie Antoinette in the Basilica of Saint-Denis. King Henry IV of France. King Henry IV of France was brutally murdered on May 14, 1610. The angry Catholic François Ravaillac hit the king in his carriage. After stabbing Henri multiple times, Ravaillac damaged vital blood vessels and murdered him. The nation was shaken by Henry IV's death. Born in 1553, Henry IV was raised Protestant. To join France, he became Catholic in 1593. He converted after years of Catholic-Protestant conflict. He granted Protestants religious freedom with the 1598 Edict of Nantes. Many staunch Catholics were furious. He was pious and born in 1577. He strongly opposed the Huguenots. He kept thinking Henry IV was trying to hurt the Catholic Church. Ravaillac had gone to the king earlier but failed to discuss his issues. He took matters into his own hands since Henri's military activities against Catholic armies insulted the Pope. Henry IV's carriage got caught in traffic on the murder day because carts blocked tiny roadways. Ravaillac recognized an opening. Ravaillac stabbed Henry as he peeked out the window to see what was taking so long. The vehicle promptly returned to the Louvre Palace, but Henry died from his injuries. Ravaillac was arrested and suffocated to question probable accomplices, but he claimed to have done it alone. He was executed in public on May 27, 1610. Henry IV's funeral was lavish. His heart was placed in a silver case, and he was interred at Saint-Denis Basilica. His tomb was torched during the French Revolution, but a memorial remains. King James II of England. English king. James II, who was born in 1633, had a dramatic end to his rule. For a lot of his childhood, he lived in exile after the English Civil War. He was Charles I's second son. When he got back to England in 1660, he led the Royal Navy as Lord High Admiral until 1673. James became a Catholic around 1669, which made things difficult when he became king in 1685. There was a lot of trouble during James II's rule. When he became king, he met a lot of opposition because he wanted to promote Catholic interests. He made the army bigger and put Catholics in important jobs, which scared many Protestants in Parliament. In 1687, he released the Declaration of Indulgence, which was meant to promote religious freedom, but was seen by many as favoring Catholics. Along with firing judges and government workers who didn't agree with his policies, this move made the conflict worse. When his second wife, Mary of Modena, had a son named James Stuart in June 1688, things got worse. A lot of Protestants were afraid that this event would lead to the establishment of a Catholic regime. In response, on November 1688, William of Orange, who was married to James's older daughter Mary and was a Protestant, began an invasion. Because the British Army and Navy didn't like James's rule, they switched their backing to William. Since James could lose his crown, he ran away to France. With French help, he tried to take back the throne in Ireland but failed. In the end, he was defeated at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. He died at the Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye in France in 1701. James II spent his last years as a refugee there. His son and grandson tried to bring back the Stuart line through rebellions, but none of them worked. James II's reign ended when he died in exile. Emperor Commodus of Rome. The shocking political plot that killed Emperor Commodus in 192 AD was a big deal. Commodus decided not to get married again after his wife, Crispina, was sent into exile and killed for adultery. Instead, he kept Marcia as his concubine. Marcia was also Commodus's advisor and had many boyfriends, including Eclectus, who was his chamberlain and whom she married while still seeing the emperor. For the Roman New Year in late 192 AD, Commodus planned to show up with gladiators instead of his normal purple robes. Marcia told him not to do this because she thought it would cause trouble. Because she made him angry, Commodus put Marcia, Eclectus, and the Praetorian prefect, Aemilius Latus, on a list of people who would be killed the next morning. That night, Phil Commodus, Commodus's helper, gave Marcia the list of people who were going to be killed by accident. When Marcia, Latus, and Eclectus saw her name at the top, they chose to do something. They planned to kill Commodus to get away with it and make Pertinax ruler instead. Marcia put poison in Commodus's wine, which she gave him after taking a bath. Although Commodus got very sick and threw up, the plotters paid Narcissus, a wrestler, and Commodus's teacher, to strangle him to make sure he would die. Rome was in chaos after Commodus's death, with 4 rulers taking power very quickly. Pertinax took over and tried to keep the empire stable by dropping taxes and cutting spending, but he was killed after only 86 days. Didius Julianus won the empire in an auction run by the Praetorian Guards. He only ruled for 2 months before Severus took over. Wassianus Julianus killed Marcia in the year 193 AD. King Gustav III of Sweden. Swedish King Gustav III was killed at a masked ball at the Royal Opera House in Stockholm on March 16, 1792. A group of unhappy nobles planned to kill him because they didn't like Gustav's rule or his recent changes, which gave the king more power while taking away the nobility's rights. Setting the date for the masked ball was part of the carefully planned murder. In black robes and white masks, Ankarström and his fellow terrorists went into the opera house on the day of the attack. Gustav III went to the ball with his friend Count Hans Henrik von Essen. He wore a mask and a cape from Venice. The rebels were set up to catch the king in the act. The shot hit Gustav in the back while he was talking to Captain Carl Frederick Pollitt. Gustav was hit at an angle by the bullet, which hurt his hip and back. Even though Gustav was badly hurt, he did not fall down right away. When Ankarström saw that the king was still moving, he became scared, dropped his weapons, and yelled, "Fire!" before running into the crowd. Von Essen and others quickly came to help the king and took him to a private room where Gustav could complain of being weak and have his clothes put out of the fire. King Gustav III escaped the attack at first, but he later died of sepsis from an infection in a wound. He was 46 years old when he died on March 29, 1792. His funeral, which took place at Ridderholmen Church on May 14, 1792, had beautiful decorations and a moving musical honor by Joseph Martin Krauss. Ankarström was caught. He then admitted to killing Gustav and was then put to death by being beheaded and cut into 4 pieces. King Henry VI of England. When King Henry VI died in 1471, it was the end of a rough rule that began during the Wars of the Roses. The Lancasters lost the Battle of Barnet on April 14, 1471, and Henry VI was sent to the Tower of London to be locked up. People have said that he was kept in the Wakefield Tower, but the official guidebook says that he was probably kept in the Lanthorn Tower, which was where the royal family lived. Thomas Neville, Viscount Fauconberg, tried to save Henry VI from the tower in the middle of May 1471, but failed. Because of what Fauconberg did, Edward IV may have realized how dangerous it was to keep Henry living. Edward IV went back to London on May 21, 1471, with his brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who would later become Richard III. He was 49 years old when he died that same night. The official account from the Yorkists said that Henry VI died of melancholy after losing people close to him. A lot of people think that Edward IV ordered his death, though. Tradition says that Henry VI died while he was praying in a small room in the tower. Some people think that Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had something to do with the killings. Henry VI's body was put on show in London the next day in an open casket to prove that he had died. The body was then taken to Blackfriars Monastery for the funeral. After the service, it was taken up the Thames by barge to Chertsey Abbey to be buried. King Richard III ordered Henry's body to be dug up and moved to St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle in 1484. In 1910, Henry's body was studied, and it was found that his head was broken, and some of his hair was matted with something that looked like blood. This makes it seem like he may have died violently, but the exact cause is still unknown. King Philip II of Spain. In the terrible year 1598, King Philip II of Spain passed away after being poisoned. Even though he didn't die right away, it was a long, painful process that showed how far political opponents would go to win. Concerns about Philip's heir were a big part of his rule. It's not clear how his first son, Don Carlos, died, and his heir, Philip III, was thought to be weak, which made people question the future of the Spanish dynasty. Philip was very religious and avoided enjoying the joys of this world, which made him fixate on work and not trust the people around him. He was notorious for being cruel, and when people fought against his rule, he would often punish whole areas as well as individuals. During his rule, Philip had a lot of problems. The Dutch were rising up against him, and even though a lot of people died, he lost control of the provinces. Spain was falling apart, and there were also uprisings and an economic crisis in the country. It was a big loss when the English beat the Spanish Armada in 1588. Philip took the loss in stride, saying, "I sent my fleet against men, not against the wind and the waves." Philip's health got worse and worse in his last years. The gout and malaria had made him very sick and uncomfortable. He was stuck in a special chair for the last 3 years of his life, which made it almost impossible for him to move. Philip II died at the age of 71 in the Escorial and was buried in the pantheon of Spanish kings. The drug that killed him caused him a lot of pain for a long time, which shows how dangerous things were in his time. King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile. In 1109, King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile died in a terrible accident that was caused by a cruel act of betrayal. Alfonso went through a slow and painful death after his own nobles poisoned him. He came to Toledo to protect the city from an Almoravid attack that was about to happen. His death was caused by a cruel plot, and he was in a lot of pain in his last moments. Alfonso wanted his body to be taken to the monastery of San Benito in Sahagún after he died as planned. At first, he was buried in a stone tomb that was set up at the base of the church. Later, during the rule of Sancho IV, this tomb was moved to a more visible spot in the church's transept because Sancho IV thought Alfonso shouldn't be buried at the base of the temple. A fire at the royal monastery of San Benito in 1810 destroyed the tomb where Alfonso's body was buried. In the abbey room until 1821, his body and the bodies of his wives were kept together. When the monks were kicked out, the bodies were put in a box and moved to a different place in 1835. The remains were given to a cousin when the monastery closed in 1835 and stayed hidden until 1902, when Professor Rodrigo Fernández Núñez found them again. Alfonso's body is now kept in the monastery of the Benedictine women of Sahagún. They are kept in a smooth stone ark with a modern marble lid. The bodies of several of his wives are buried nearby in a separate tomb. King Louis XVII of France. Louis XVII's death in 1795 was a sad and violent end that was marked by neglect and abuse. He was the second son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. His birth name was Louis Charles de France. He spent his early years at the fancy palace of Versailles, but when the French Revolution started, things went badly for him. After the attack on the Tuileries Palace in August 1792, Louis Charles was sent to the Temple jail. On January 21, 1793, his father was put to death. The young prince was given the name Louis XVII, but that didn't protect him from the harsh facts of France during the Revolution. Marie Antoinette, Louis Charles's mother, was taken away to be put to death, and Antoine Simon, a shoemaker and rebel, took care of him. Simon was in charge of convincing Louis Charles to give up being a king. He made the young prince speak against his mother at her trial, which led to her death. This trick was part of a bigger plan to get rid of all traces of the old government. Louis XVII was locked up in horrible conditions when he was only 8 years old. The young prince got very sick very quickly because the jail was dirty. He passed away in 1795 from tuberculosis. The pain he was in jail was very different from the wealth he had known before. After he died, Dr. Philippe Jean Pelletan kept his heart safe. In 1975, it was moved to the royal crypt at Saint-Denis. Modern studies have proven that the boy who died in the Temple prison was, in fact, Marie Antoinette's son. This puts an end to any rumors of a body double and brings attention to the sad end of a young life destroyed by political unrest. King Charles IX of France. King Charles IX of France passed away on May 30, 1574. He was only 23 years old. He probably died of cancer, but there are still a lot of scary stories about how he died. King Henry II had 3 sons. Charles was the third. Charles became king when he was only 10 years old after his father died in 1559, and his bigger brother Francis died the next year. Catherine de' Medici, his mother, was the real power behind the throne. She used her position to support Catholics and put down Protestant Huguenots. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572 was one of the worst times in Charles's rule. Catherine planned this horrible event, during which thousands of Huguenots were killed over several days. Charles felt very bad about killing so many people. He had visions and fears that followed him around. For example, he thought that the crows on the roof of the Louvre were the dying Huguenots' cries. Several stories make it sound like Charles's death wasn't just from being sick. One story says that a book killed him. Catherine de' Medici was said to have planned to give Henry of Navarre, Charles's Protestant son-in-law, a book that had poison sprinkled all over it. It is said that Charles touched the book and got arsenic on his lips, which caused him to die painfully. But this story is not likely because arsenic wouldn't work that fast. There is also a scary and unlikely story that Charles died of fear after a black magic rite. According to this story, Catherine killed a kid as part of a dark ritual to call on the devil and save Charles. People said the claimed ritual was terrifying, and Charles is said to have died of fear. In fact, Charles's last years were ruined by poor health and a strong sense of guilt over the massacre. His mother kept running France's government until Henry, Charles's younger brother, became king, King Louis XVI of France. On January 21, 1793, King Louis XVI of France died in a terrible way. During the French Revolution, he was put to death by guillotine as a show of punishment. The king's death was both a dramatic show and a brutally efficient operation, which shows how violent the revolt was. Louis tried to back reforms at first, but his indecision and unwillingness to fully accept change made things worse. By October 1789, a crowd had moved the royal family from Versailles to Paris. Louis tried to get away in June 1991, but was caught in Varennes and sent back to Paris. In 1792, the rebels put him on trial, got rid of the king, and made France a republic. Louis was taken from the Temple jail to the Place de la Révolution on the morning of January 21. When the trip began around 8 in the morning, Louis was in a carriage with soldiers and government leaders on either side. A lot of people were watching over the area, and cannons were set up to keep the crowd in check. The guillotine was placed in a visible place, and there were a lot of people watching. Louis got to the scaffold at 10 in the morning. He was wearing stockings, a white shirt, and black silk pants. He was going to talk to the crowd. However, the crowd yelled, telling him to be quiet. They yelled to cut him off. Louis said a few words in which he asked for forgiveness and said he was innocent. The killer then quickly cut off his head with the guillotine. There were cheers and chants from the crowd, who waved hats and yelled slogans. After he was put to death, Louis's body was placed in a grave close to where he was put to death. The grave was filled with quicklime to help the body break down faster. After that, his body was moved more than once. The dramatic hanging of Louis XVI showed how harsh the revolution was and marked the end of France's old government. Thank you for watching the video. Stay tuned for more exciting ones.